40 years ago tomorrow, Down East Airlines Flight 46 crashed in Owl's Head while trying to land in the fog. 17 people died. It's still Maine's worst commercial aviation disaster. One person survived.
Remarkably so. John Small sat down with him to talk about that night and what the last 4 decades have been like for him. John joins us now with more on that. Hello, John.
Jim and Emily, John McCafferty was just 16 years old at the time of that crash. As you can imagine, not a day goes by that he doesn't think about that horrible night. As he told me, he realizes it's a miracle he's still here.
It's something that I live with, I have to live with.
May 30th, 1979 seemed like a normal day. John McCafferty was on his way home to Searsmont from Florida. He was delayed in Boston because of the weather, but eventually Down East Airlines Flight 46 was ready to leave for Owl's Head. John remembers standing in line in the rain to board the plane.
When I came to that plane and I looked up, a feeling just overwhelmed me like I had never had before in my life. And I froze, and I just knew that that plane was going to crash. I just knew it was.
He still got on the plane, saying he was very anxious the whole flight. On approach to Knox County Regional Airport, he could see the fog out the window, then chaos.
The trees just came up. I hollered to everybody, "We're going to crash." And then it happened, and it happened quickly, but you could hear the whole plane starting to crunch, and it pretty much ripped the whole plane apart.
John was severely injured, an arm and leg broken, numerous lacerations, and his scalp had been torn off. The only thing he could hear in the woods on that foggy night was jet fuel pouring from the plane.
The first thing I did was holler to see if anybody was all right, and I knew within a very short time that nobody had made it.
He began to crawl away from the wreckage and says the oddest thing happened.
There was a light in front of me which looked like a flame. That's the direction I crawled. It seems as though I could never get to that light, and I guess I made it about 75 yards, and I came to a dip in the ground, and I rolled myself into that, thinking that if the plane did blow, that the fire may blow over me. But I was also soaked in fuel because I had to crawl right through that fuel.
John was in the woods for more than an hour before rescuers found the wreckage. He thought he was going to die.
The worst feeling that I had was that my parents are not going to know how good I was with God. After a while, I got very comfortable with it because I had a lot of time to think about it.
John says rescuers were stunned to find a survivor, but given his injuries, they thought they'd never see him again after they closed the ambulance doors.
Obviously, I'm very glad to be alive. I thank the good Lord for that. The bad thoughts that I have mostly are for the victims and their families.
Even though his injuries nagged at him, John worked for years as a union pipe fitter. He's retired now. You'd also think he wouldn't like to fly, but he's been back in a plane many times. In fact, he owned ultralight planes and crashed them several times. He says he's only been scared of flying once since that night, a flight on the same model plane from the Owl's Head crash.
The plane started taxiing down the runway, and I was going to ask the pilot to stop and let me off. And luckily, a lady beside me got me calmed down, and we actually had a nice flight.
John would like to someday see a memorial for the crash victims, and airport officials indicated they'd be willing to work with him on that. He's also been working on writing a book.
I plan on honoring all the victims of the crash in the book.
As for the obvious question, why was he the only one to survive?
You can actually drive yourself crazy with that question. I've wondered that for a long time, and I still do, but I don't let it eat me up like it used to. I figure we're all here for a reason. Whatever it is, I don't know.
Now, the NTSB determined there were several factors that caused that crash, including pilot error. As for the book John is working on, he says he's not a writer, so he'd really like some help with it. You can email him at johnmcaffertysoulsurvivor@gmail.com. Now, coming up at 6, we're going to visit the crash site with John and one of his rescuers from that night, the first time they've met since the crash. And again, I just want to thank John for sitting down and telling us this story. Just incredible, 40 years later still.
Part 2 is incredible too.
It really is. And another incredible part, that story he told me, his son was working in Pennsylvania, and someone contacted him and said, hey, was that your dad that survived that flight? And he said, yes. And this person told his son, that was my uncle sitting next to him.
Oh my goodness.
This is 40 years later, this just happened, and John has got the nephew's phone number, and they're going to get in touch. So 40 years later, still those connections.
Wow. Jeez, last man to be potentially next to him while he was alive.
Wow, incredible.
Thanks, John. That's fascinating. Tonight at 6, you say, right?
Yes.
Terrific.